Welcome to episode 134 of the Daniel Yoris podcast with today's guest, Richard Bucciarelli. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Joined here once again, over 100 episodes later with Richard Bucciarelli. Richard, thanks for being here, man. I appreciate you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. And congratulations on more than 100 episodes and many more to come.
Thank you. It's crazy how time flies, and it feels like it wasn't that long ago that we spoke on the podcast, but like it's actually been, more than 2 years, and it feels like even it was yesterday that we were seeing each other on the soccer field and training under you and whatnot, and it's a while ago now.
That was about 16 or 17 years ago. So
yeah. And I'm not that old, but it makes me feel very old. I'm almost 30 now, and it's wild. But congratulations to you as well, just having moved into a new facility. That's a really big move, and I think that not a lot of people appreciate what that means. They see it like, oh, that's cool, but it's like, oh, this is like a big headache, a big investment, a big step business wise, and in helping more people and training more athletes and more people. So congratulations to you on that as well.
Thank you very much.
How have things been for you then? What's kind of new and exciting in the world of Richard and speed training?
Yeah, well, for sure, new and exciting. I mean, the new facility is definitely top of the list. So we moved from a previous location, which was inside a sports facility, now to our own space. Which was actually a former F45, so it was already a gym, which is kind of anyway, they went out of business, this particular location, which is not good for them, but good opportunity for us. And so it's a larger space than what we had, so we have even more equipment, including some more unique technology from some of the treadmill and high intensity interval training that we do. We've built a larger clinic with physiotherapy. We've added other practitioners, so not just a physiotherapist and a chiropodist, but we've now added a chiropractor and a massage therapist. We also have built a little mini turf field. So this was something that previously we were in facilities that had soccer fields that we could use sometimes, but not all the time. And so now, we have our own little field that we can use whenever we want. We've got bathrooms and showers, and we're building, I know we talked a little bit about this. I'm building a little recovery room that's going to have some different types of therapy, light therapy, cold therapy, etc., to help athletes recover. And then, of course, not just athletes, but we're expanding also into providing similar type of training. So the training that's effective with athletes, but modifying it and adapting it a little bit to the general population. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that too. So that's exciting. Other than that, I mean, I had another a child since we last talked. My son was born last year, and he's 11 months old now. My daughter is about to turn 5, and so those are the exciting things that are happening in my life, and they make a little more work for me, but
but a lot more joy as well.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Now you mentioning about the expansion of the facility, not just in size, but in the things that you can offer, really reminds me of, or makes me think about, I'm sure that when you set out, you would have had a vision for like what you wanted your business and your facility to look like. And then when you sit down and think about it, it's like, okay, so I want, the treadmills, the high-speed interval training, the weights and that are physical training, and I want the recovery room and the soccer fields and this and that and the other thing. And it's like, okay, but that costs like way too much money to have all that. I don't have like an endless pot of money when I'm starting my business on day one. Right. So we got to get down to the basics. Like, what are we going to do? What are we going to be good at? What's going to be the most effective for your clients and for your athletes? And I think that that's such a good kind of segue or reminder for people. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do. You can train. You can have a super good diet. You can do cross training. You can do strength training. You can do endurance training. You can have an ice bath in your house and red light and do all these things. But you don't have like a 10,000 square foot facility in the back of your house to do all of this stuff. So what are the actual most important things that you got to get done? And then you can add things as you become, more proficient or they become more important to you. So I kind of want you to go through and talk a little bit about like the bare bones basics. And, we were talking about before how some people get kind of distracted, shiny object syndrome with like, I got to do all these things, but it's like, what is the core of what you do? And then why do these other things kind of help?
Right. Okay. So it's a good question. And I don't want to come off as a hypocrite or, because there may be some irony here in me talking about bare bones while at the same time, I won't get into all the details, but since I opened my first facility, which was back in 2010, I've used some very unique technology, which also happens to be a little more expensive. We've got the fastest treadmills in the world. We've got treadmills that, go at very high inclines, and One of them even uses an unweighting system, so a harness that, more or less makes athletes feel a bit lighter while they're running. And we have gait analysis software and all this stuff. And maybe we can chat more about the technology. But what I would say is, ultimately, the decision for me in my business and the work that I was doing to open that facility, first of all, it came after a good 12 years or so working with athletes either on a field. And I know that's how we met way back when, that you can't get more bare bones than that. I would just drive somewhere with a few cones and whatever and train people. And, I did that from the time I was, literally 19, 20 years old. And then from there, actually working in facilities so I went to York University and they have a track and field center there, still, great indoor facility, and a lot of top track and field athletes still train there. But that particular facility would allow fitness coaches like me to come in and, for a very small fee, bring athletes in and train. And I did that, as I said, for over a decade. And then eventually, I got exposed to, some of this technology, specifically with the high speed and high incline treadmills initially. And what I saw there was, again, specifically for athletes, but then we can talk about how this works with anybody, but was that the equipment and the technology was a way to get a higher intensity out of training and running training, basically, than a higher intensity than is possible to run or do other types of exercises without the technology. So it doesn't mean that it's not possible to get high intensity or a good workout, let's say, without the technology, but the technology made it a little bit better. And so initially with athletes, again, mostly in my business, I was working with the more competitive type athletes. There were some, beginners or whatever, but a lot of them were trying to improve their fitness in order to get into a college or university program. And a lot of them ended up also going into national teams in Canada and other countries and playing professionally. And, so these are the more competitive athletes that if they take care of all of their basic training, that this extra level of intensity will really help them. Again, back to the idea about bare bones and maybe what perhaps your listeners or even kind of general public out there that are thinking about fitness. Really, in order to make any type of improvement from any type of exercise, there's this thing called the principle of overload. And so what that means, and this is literally every cell in our body, responds in the same way. We need to present the physiological systems with some type of overload. So meaning a workload, an intensity, which is greater than the current capacity of the physiological system. So if it's the cardiorespiratory system, then that means some intensity or workload, which is a little bit greater than the current fitness level of that system. Same with the muscles, same with everything, right? It's the reason why if you only lift light weights at some point, you won't get bigger and stronger. And the heart muscle works the same way and all of that. So the principle of overload is really important to understand. So now we say, okay, how can we, let's say if we want to look at people who have the goal of improving their cardiorespiratory or cardiovascular fitness? Well, that means you need to provide some type of stimulus consistently to the heart and lungs where the load is a little bit greater than what the capacity is. You can do that really easily, actually, as a matter of fact. You can do that without any technology at all. All you need to do is walk, run, cycle, any one of those simple forms of exercise, which, by the way, are free. You can just put on shoes and go outside. And, but the key is the intensity. Okay, so I've done, even in my own master's and PhD work, research, some work with high-intensity interval training. Lots of other excellent researchers in Canada, all over the world have done it. And the term HIIT or high intensity interval training, this is, is a common thing that lots of coaches and fitness coaches and exercise scientists are using, and they're very well aware of. Essentially,
a lot of people say it, but not a lot of people use it. And I think you'd agree
right.
with
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Right. So maybe there's a bit of a gap in understanding. So basically, okay, again, we need a higher intensity. We need something which overloads the cardiorespiratory system, to a level that's greater than its current capacity. And the research has shown that the best way to do that is not with a continuous form of exercise. And again, if we want to go back to bare bones, not just going out and running at the same speed for whatever amount of time, but some type of interval, which is simply a period of time that is a little bit shorter, can be 10 seconds, can be 30 seconds, can be 1 minute. There's all kinds of different protocols. And then within that time, you have an interval, and then you have a rest period. And sometimes the length of the interval and the length of the rest period are the same, meaning you run faster for an interval for 30 seconds, and then you run slower or you rest and catch your breath for 30 seconds. And sometimes the length of the rest period is a little bit more, or maybe even a little bit less than the length of the work period. And, this is all, there's lots of different protocols out there. We, in our business and the work that I've done in my research, we've kind of focused on work to rest ratios. And that's the kind of, again, the ratio between the work time and the rest time. We've focused on anywhere from 1 to 2, meaning you rest twice as much as you work, up to about 1 to 6. So, and that's because we're working with athletes in a specific population. But this is an excellent way to present an overload to the cardiovascular system, which is greater than its current capacity. It's an excellent way to achieve most of the results that probably most people want, which is improve fitness, prevent chronic disease like heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. You can't prevent it 100%, but you can certainly limit your risk. Burn fat, gain muscle, increase metabolism, look better, feel better, all those things. And in fact, with a well-designed high-intensity interval training program, these results can be achieved with 2 to 4 workouts per week. And the workouts actually, and I mean, I'm doing it myself, so I can speak even from personal experience. You can have workouts where, like, start to finish, you tie up your shoes from that time that you tie up your shoes till the time you're done is 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And you can get very excellent results with this. But the key is the intensity of those intervals. And that intensity, generally speaking, so that means when you're doing the high intensity interval portion, the heart rate, and then you can look at percentage of VO2 max or other ways to measure intensity. But in any case, the intensity needs to be above 75 to 80% of what the individual is capable of. So 75 to 80% of max or more. And the truth is that, I'm not so sure that most people maybe, number one, understand how to push themselves that hard. And then perhaps even if they get it, they don't want to do it because it doesn't feel comfortable. And sometimes, to be honest, if I'm simplifying it to explain it to an athlete or their parents or whatever, I say, look, you're probably going to feel like you're almost about to throw up for about 30 minutes. But, then you'll feel better afterwards. It's just a short amount of time. And that's kind of the idea. So if more people, I think, would understand how to do that, and then would have the motivation, and there's a whole psychological side to this and all that, but to be able to push themselves to actually get to that intensity, for a small amount of time, then I think you can get excellent results. And again, back to your question, which is, it can't get more bare bones than that. You can get a decent pair of running shoes, and then there's no other costs other than the time. And as I said, the time is very minimal. High intensity interval training, 2 to 4 days per week. So.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And there's obviously a lot to unpack here. But one thing to kind of highlight is that very, very few people that you'll see in regular gyms and people who are beginners, clients of mine and stuff like that, like a commercial, regular gym. Very few people train hard, and this is for like strength training, for lifting weights, or for cardio. Like it's been, we're on the tail end of summer here, and so everyone in the summer wants to like do cardio to like lose weight, and fine. You haven't you've been eating cake all year, and all of a sudden you're going to go on the treadmill for 20 minutes and whatever. But I see people do this at the gym where they'll go on the treadmill for 15 minutes, and then they get off the treadmill, they go on the bike for 15 minutes, and then they get off the bike, and then they go on the Stairmaster for 15 minutes, thinking that one, those implements are doing something different, and two, thinking that the cardio at like a kind of whatever pace itself is somehow leading to fat loss when they're at a very low level of intensity. But they're sweating because like it's hot in the gym and it's hot, and so you feel like, oh, like I was working really hard. But if you put that person training under someone like yourself, really pushing them, really understanding, okay, this is what your body is capable of despite what you may think, then that's when you start to realize like, oh, that's what hard training is like. And where I'm going with this is that training difficult is actually a skill, and it's an important thing to develop. I notice this with a lot of my clients. When they come in, it's like, you do 10 reps of a bench press with 10-pound dumbbells. And it's like, oh, that felt hard. And it's like, okay, yeah, because it's the first time you did it. But also, when you get better at this, you know, you could have done 30 reps of that. That was just hard because it's new to you. It's not actually a high intensity, right? So how do you go about then trying to teach people? Like, what's your strategy for getting people from that beginner, like, oh, I'm huffing and puffing and sweating, like this is difficult, to like, oh, I can actually really push past this, and the mental aspect of that as well, of pushing, like, this is hard, but I can keep going. I've got more. My body's got more. I can push past this to get to that threshold that we actually need to achieve overload.
Right. Yeah. So I would say, I mean, definitely you made a good point. And, you know, the truth is with beginners, there's these concepts of training age, or, you know, that kind of thing. And that is what it is. There's a learning effect. First of all, for any beginner, and even athletes a lot of times, because, you know, the truth is that, and maybe we can talk more about this, but my primary sport that I've played and coached and worked in at all different levels is soccer. And, you know, almost nobody in soccer is training as hard as they should be. Almost, you know, they're almost all out of shape. But in any case, even athletes, but of course this applies to the general population. If they're not accustomed to training hard or at a high intensity, then you're not going to necessarily be able to get them to, you know, to be able to do that right away. It may take time, it may take a few months. And there's, you know, good literature on this about adaptation phases and that kind of thing with training. And so, I think, again, like you said, teaching people about the meaning of intensity and how to quantify it. And again, you can use heart rate monitors. I think with weight training, it's fairly simple because you can measure the weight that's used. And even if you don't have access to technology for a heart rate monitor or whatever, there's rating of perceived exertion, like those sort of subjective scales. But if people are honest, those can be very, reliable too. So it's like, as a coach or a fitness coach, there is an educational component. And I've experienced it, you know, that people can learn. And once they do learn, you know, they can get much better at it. And again, you know, the idea behind training at a high intensity is, okay, yeah, they have to learn how to do it. And then the key is trying to find the methods which allow you to get the highest intensity that you possibly can. And I can speak about cardiovascular fitness and about strength training. And you know, the concept is very similar. As I said, you know, we talked about bare bones and running and all that. And, you know, I invested in this, you know, treadmill technology specifically because I saw that it was a way with cardiovascular training to make the intensity of the intervals higher. Strength training, again, you know, you made an excellent point, which is a lot of times people, they lift a certain weight, or you may tell them to do 10 repetitions or 12, and they do 10 or 12. But the truth is that a prescription of 10 repetitions or 12, what that actually means is the maximum weight you can lift 10 times.
Yes.
And they have to understand that. And maybe the 8th and 9th and 10th rep, there's a spot or, you know, a little bit of a struggle, or maybe often, I mean, there's very good literature on this too, is about fatigue. 3 sets of 10. Well, you know what? The third set, you may only get 8 with the same weight. It's very common. Like, you don't, you know, so anyway, people need to learn it. They need to experience it. And then eventually, you know, obviously, you know, hopefully they'll get it. But, that all goes back to the concept of the principle of overload. So with cardiovascular training, okay, the improvements that are made, not only do you need that high intensity, but actually the improvements. So we can talk about everything from the strength and contractility of the heart, stroke volume, which is the amount of blood that gets pumped out. The maximal oxygen consumption is our ability to utilize oxygen, even at the cellular level. So the actual the muscle cells in the heart and the exercising muscles have something called mitochondria in them. Mitochondria is, you know, the little organelle in the cell that helps actually produce energy. So we grow mitochondria based on, you know, the intensity of training and getting to an overload. But those improvements are dependent upon intensity, meaning the higher the intensity, the greater the magnitude of improvement. So think, you know, more mitochondria and more, you know, larger heart muscle, all of that. And also the greater the speed of the improvement, meaning the changes come faster. And it's the exact same in terms of the improvements with strength training. So once people learn, again, 3 sets of 10 or 4 sets of 10 means the heaviest weight you can lift 10 times. or 3 sets of 6 or whatever the protocol is, and they do that consistently, they get bigger improvements, greater muscle size, greater strength, all of it, and the improvements come faster. And so that, like, you know, and I just don't know really if that message is getting through to like gyms and fitness coaches. And, you know, I am a professor at the college and university level. And, you know, this is something that whatever course I'm teaching, you know, I try to, you know, mix that in there, because really at that, you know, in that environment, I'm kind of helping to teach and train the future, personal trainers and fitness coaches and strength and conditioning coaches. So they have to learn about intensity, and they have to learn ways, within reason, that they can present a greater intensity and overload system. And anyway, that leads into periodization, which maybe we can talk about next. So,
I don't think that message of like intensity is really getting through to a lot of people, because I still see so many people who consider a rep range just counting. Oh, well, the program said, you know, 3 sets of 10, like you said, so I stopped at 10. It's like, well, your body doesn't have an internal rep counter. Like, this is not some inherent human thing that it just counts reps. Like the muscles in your body and the tendons and the tissues understand forces and intensity. And so if there's not enough force applied to it, then it has no reason to change. Like, it doesn't know that you did 10, and that doesn't mean, 10 is like the functional hypertrophy range. And if you did 6 reps, all of a sudden you're building strength. And if you did 12 reps, you're building whatever. Like, it doesn't work like that. The number is a reflection of intensity relative to like your 1 rep max, right? If you said 1 rep, then you know that you're trying to lift as much as you can for 1 rep. And 10 reps is some percentage of that, where you should be essentially maxing out-ish at that 10 rep, close to 10 rep. And this is why, for anyone who ever wonders this, that reps are always written in ranges. Very rarely will you have like 3 sets of 10. It's always 3 sets of 10 to 12. And that's because you'll land somewhere in that 10 to 12 range. Whether it's exactly 10 or 11, doesn't matter, just so like the intensity. And the same thing is with cardio training, right? It's like a 30-minute run doesn't mean anything if that 30-minute run was like you didn't even, you know, break a sweat or weren't exhausted or tired at all.
If the intensity wasn't high enough.
Exactly. Now this does bring me to another question, and this kind of leads into periodization, but there's been a lot more talk lately about incorporating zone 2 cardio training. Zone 2 being like the lower intensity at an intensity, you know, just to sort of define it for people, where like, you know, I don't know what the exact heart rate zone is. I think they say like 65 to 70%, 75%, something like that. And it's like an intensity where you should still be able to maintain a conversation without interrupting your breathing pattern. The talk test, right? And so where does that fall into being useful in terms of improving VO2 max or improving just cardiorespiratory fitness overall?
Okay, so any type of cardiovascular exercise is useful in the sense that it's still training, you know, strengthening the heart muscle and all of that. And in a good, you know, maybe we can speak a bit more about periodization and all that. But in a periodized training program, essentially where there's changes throughout the week or throughout a period of time in volume and intensity, you know, these slower or lower intensity or moderate intensity workouts are great to incorporate into a routine. So, you know, usually like I can speak about athletes, and then I can say again, you know, general population can train something like an athlete and modify it to their own capacity. But, a moderate intensity training session, which might be zone 2 in cardio or in between zone 2 and zone 3, that type of workout is good to do maybe on the day after or 2 days after a very high intensity day. So, you know, it can still be effective, but if that's all you do and you never, over the course of a week or, you know, 10 days or some block of time, you never have at least 1 or 2 days where you present a higher overload or a higher intensity. Yes, you may improve fitness to a certain degree, but it's unlikely that you're going to actually get really, well, okay, you may improve, but you're not going to optimize improvements. And that's the key, right? Is like, improving is not a binary, concept where it's either you get fitter or you don't, or you get stronger and you don't. There's a scale. So optimizing improvement requires overload. And again, that requires a higher intensity. And I'll say, you know, just so everyone's listening is clear about this, is the intensity, even if it's at 75, 80, 90% of maximum, that is all relative to each individual. So if you and I are doing the same exact workout, meaning let's say we're doing 10 repetitions of a 1 minute run at 80% of VO2 max with 1 minute rest. That's a good workout, by the way. Very effective and only takes 20 minutes. If my VO2 max or my velocity at VO2 max, which is the speed at which I reach VO2 max, is 10 miles an hour and yours is 12 miles an hour, then, I'm going to run at 8 miles an hour and you're going to run at, whatever it is, 10.5. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same workout, but I'm training relative to my maximal intensity and you're training relative to yours. And what the literature shows, again, with cardiovascular training or strength training, is that you can apply that concept to anybody. I actually spoke about this yesterday. One of the classes I teach at the university is Intro to Health. We're talking about the use of exercise in the rehabilitation following heart disease, including heart attack and heart failure. And of course, someone who suffers, from a disease like that, they're going to see a physician, cardiologist, they're going to have some recovery time. But when it's time to exercise, as a matter of fact, they typically are going to get prescribed some type of high intensity interval training.
Right.
Relative to their capacity. Now, the physician or cardiologist might say, okay, we're not going to exceed, 120 beats a minute or whatever it is. Like there's thresholds there.
Yeah.
But
their high intensity is a lot lower than the average person, but it's still high intensity to them.
For them, right? Yeah. And then again, they're going to present an overload to the heart muscle and the heart's going to get stronger. And it's really interesting because if you think about it, there's probably nobody in the world that needs to strengthen their heart more than someone who's just had a heart attack or has a condition like heart failure, because it literally means like the heart is weak. Yeah. And if it doesn't get stronger, then,
not good.
You don't survive, right? So this concept can literally be applied to anybody. And again, as long as the intensity is relative, then it works really well.
So in speaking in the context of an athlete, then, so assuming that this person has, unlimited, like they're a professional athlete, they have unlimited time, their full-time job is training. Right. Where does the lower, zone 2 cardio training fit in to their training regime, and like how often should they be doing it relative to the higher intensity training? Because also higher intensity training, you shouldn't be doing that every single day. Like there has to be a recovery period.
Not at all. So now we're speaking about periodization, and I'll talk about athletes, but I'm going to say you can totally apply this to the general population. I've done it, and again, they get excellent results. So first of all, if we wanted to plot, load, is just a simple concept, which is the volume of training, usually measured either in time, maybe with strength training, number of reps or whatever, but some, measure of volume, and then intensity, which is easy to measure. Like if we think about it as heart rate or percentage of maximal heart rate, can be RPE, can be the weight lifted or whatever, but volume multiplied by intensity, that's load. And even anyone who's got a Fitbit or a Polar Watch or, there's a load metric. There's some algorithm in there which is factoring in the volume and the intensity. So if we were to plot, and I got to make sure I'm getting this right because I'm going this way. Yeah. So if we were to plot load, on your y-axis and, days of the week or whatever on the x-axis, it needs to be a wave pattern. Meaning if there's a high load day where the volume and or the intensity was high, then that needs to be followed either by a moderate or a low load day, or maybe, 2 low load days. And then around the middle of the week, you can get another peak again. So you have this wave. And so more or less within a week, if you've got 2 or maybe 3 peaks or high load days, that's more than enough. The low or the moderate loads fit in between those. And a very common protocol, again, my sport is soccer, so I know it very well. And, there's a game once a week usually, and the load is always high. It's almost maximal. And maybe you can consider it maximal, After that, there's either a day off or a recovery day where the load is really low. Right. Maybe let's say the game was Sunday, so Monday is a recovery day. Tuesday perhaps is a moderate day, and then Wednesday becomes a high day again. And then Thursday is moderate, and then Friday and Saturday are kind of low, and you repeat that cycle. And of course, if there's 2 games in a week, then you change it or whatever. But throughout the week, then you have that wave-like pattern. And again, that's one of the main concepts of periodization. And every person who is training can absolutely apply the same exact concept to their own training. Don't do 2 very high load days consecutively. Allow for some recovery and lower and make it a wave-like pattern. And then the next thing which I'll mention is just, and again, if we go back to the concept of load, okay, that, there's a simple way to think about, because maybe people are thinking, well, how do I start? How much is too much? You know, right? How do I do this? So, there's something called the acute to chronic workload ratio. Okay. And what that is a ratio between the acute load, which is what you do today. And again, load being volume multiplied by intensity. So what you do today, and the ratio between that load and the chronic workload. Now, there's a few ways to think about chronic load. Think of it as a general rule, the average of the workload that you've had over the past 3 weeks. And then there's some there's weighted averages and stuff to, kind of make it a bit more, precise, let's say, right? But basically what you're doing today relative to what you've been doing over the last 3 weeks. And what you've been doing over the last 3 weeks is more or less as a measure of your current capacity. So if that ratio it should be higher than 1, because if it's lower than 1, that means what you've done today is lower than your capacity. Now that's okay for a recovery day, but that's certainly not okay for the days where you need an overload like that. And that's literally what an overload is, by the way. So if the ratio is 1, there's no overload. It has to be greater than 1 to have an overload. Okay. Now, the idea and the literature is pretty clear on this, and I've done it in practice too. So, I've got a lot of experience with this. As long as the ratio doesn't go higher than about 1.2 or maybe 1.25. What does that mean? That means what you do today should not be 20 to 25%, or at least should not be greater than 20%, greater than 25% of the load that you've been, training at for the last 3 weeks. Okay? It's like if you're used to bench pressing with 100 pounds as your weight, for 3 weeks you've been doing that, you're not all of a sudden going to go and bench press 130 pounds. You might only add 5 pounds on each side. It's a simple concept, but that's a 10% increase, right? Yeah. So you just don't want to do 25, 30, 40% increases. And by the way, it's that increase in load, which is disproportionate to capacity, which actually causes injury. Mm-hmm. And that leads me into, my criticisms with a lot of the, soccer specifically. So the provincial and national soccer governing bodies and the incorrect information that they give to these hundreds of thousands of people that are playing soccer. And as a whole, sports and some fitness organizations in the province and in the country where we live, the information that's being given to everybody, which is that, I call it the overtraining myth, which is we tell all these young athletes, and to a lesser extent, we also tell, adults and everybody, you're getting hurt because you're doing too much. You're overtraining too much. And that's incomplete at best, and it's a little bit disingenuous, right? So as a matter of fact, nobody's doing too much. Some of them are doing too much too soon. Yeah. Right? There's an increase in load that's disproportionate to what they're capable of. That's the cause of the injury. Yeah. The problem with telling people that they're doing too much is that what's the next step, the logical progression to that? Well, they do less.
And they're already doing too little.
That's right. And they're already doing too little, and they're already out of shape. So now their fitness gets lower, and guess what happens to their injury risk?
Higher.
It goes up, right? So it's not about doing too much or too little. It's about too much too soon. And to understand that, you have to understand the acute to chronic workload ratio. And then, there's no reason why even, just a regular adult that's not an athlete can't start with a certain load and start incrementally making 5 to 10% increases every period of time. That's what periodization is. Maybe every week or every 2 weeks, a small increase. And then they can get to the point where they can train 5 or 6 days a week if they have the time for it, and slowly, gradually improve their fitness while minimizing risk of injury. Athletes do it. Non-athletes can do it. And I laugh sometimes because, again, in soccer, we have some players, supposedly high performance players, and I use that, I put the air quotes in there. They're training 3 days a week. The intensity, the load of the training sessions is very low. The coaches are just talking all the time. And then these people are being told by the governing body that no more than 3 practices a week, because then your risk of overtraining goes up. So they don't do any other exercise.
Yeah.
Fitness goes down, and then they go play games where the load is very high. They can't handle the games. They get hurt. And of course, this positive feedback loop repeats itself. So
yeah, the stuff in soccer to me that doesn't make sense. And I think this is, I'm not as immersed in the world of soccer as you are, and nearly not as much as I was a few years ago, but it's similar to all sports where kind of the old heads in the sport think that like the fitness stuff is just extra to the sport. Yeah. And it's like, just play the sport and you'll be good, because that's how we used to do it 75 years ago. It's like, well, 75 years ago, they weren't very good athletes. Yeah. Or we're a lot better than that now. We know a lot more. So it's like 3 training sessions a week, which are sport training sessions, like training your technical skills, your team, your formation, your tactical skills. Like that's not super high intensity work. Like we used to do those training sessions with my team. Like those were easy practices. Like you barely sweat or do, it's not very hard, but it's very important to the sport that you're playing, for the skill that you're doing. Then you have to go and do your actual fitness work and get fit for the game. And so doing 3 kind of technical, tactical sessions per week, that's not really physical training, especially for someone who's a pro athlete. And then you go into a 90-minute game and wonder why you pull your hamstring, 15 minutes into the game. It's really no surprise, but somehow it's not common knowledge amongst the people who should know.
Yeah, well, they violate the acute to chronic workload ratio, right? But so soccer or other sports absolutely can be used as a way to build fitness, but again, you need the right intensity, and that requires knowledge from coaches, and again, I mean, I've tried very hard for a very long time here in Ontario and Canada to teach, but the powers that be don't seem to be very receptive to that knowledge, and I truly believe that the main reason for that is that the people that are in charge of teaching coaches, they have no knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so when people, when new knowledge and information is presented to them that they don't understand, they'll probably be happier if nobody understands it, because then at least their own lack of knowledge will not get exposed. That's the experience I've had in soccer. Now, more broadly speaking, okay, it's not that different than what's happening with fitness and physical education in general. Okay, so gym classes back in the day used to be, a fairly, let's say, well-structured, rigorous, demanding, and intense form of exercise. And in addition to the physical education that children would get in public schools for free, there were also school teams and relatively inexpensive after-school sports programs that, were almost everybody could do and could afford and all that. And then there was less homework and less free time and less technology and all that. So there was much more time even to do, play sports and play around, kids playing with their friends and all that. So we've we've gone completely the opposite direction with all of that. Childhood obesity and just children being out of shape, has become a much greater problem than it was. Overweight and obesity among adults in Canada. I mean, I've got the data clear in my mind because I'm teaching this stuff right now. We're at basically about 50% of the population overweight. We're at over 30%, almost 1/3 obese. It's getting worse. Mm-hmm. So it's to me, it's kind of all based on like a fundamental misunderstanding of how much exercise is required and what intensity of exercise is required. So you can play soccer at a high intensity 3, 4, 5 days a week, and you can build your fitness perhaps to the point that you don't need you might need strength training or whatever, but maybe you can, but no one's doing that. And again, right. Why aren't they doing it? Because no one is teaching the coaches about fitness and periodization and whatever. Now, why are they not teaching the coaches? Because the people in charge of teaching coaches are incompetent.
Right.
And their lack of competence translates directly into the teaching and courses that they provide. So, and I'm not going to say that all physical education in the province or the country is incompetent. There's very good teachers and people out there, but I have definitely noticed, I've got a lot of friends and colleagues that are teachers and all that, and there's just been a de-emphasis on physical education and, gym class and all of that in general in school. Yeah. And so I think maybe the idea in the educational system was, let the kids do that on their own and let them go play sports, and that's okay. But now we're funneling kids into all these different sports programs, from 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night. And anyway, maybe not the ideal way to do it, but
no, I think with the kids anyways, like I think some of the message of the over specialization at too early of an age was misinterpreted as overtraining. And so maybe a kid playing baseball 7 days a week, well, maybe they don't need to play baseball 7 days a week, but it's not because they don't need to exercise 7 days a week. It's like maybe they only need to play baseball when they're 9 years old. 3 days a week is plenty, and then another day they can do swimming lessons, and another day they can play soccer, play hockey, do gymnastics, like whatever else, just to change up the stimulus and the physical training that they're getting. But that's not about like the volume of training that they're doing. And then same thing with regular people. Again, it's like I'll see someone comes in 60 pounds overweight, and we talk about maybe you'll train 3 days a week, and like, oh, but I want to be careful not to like overtrain. And I'm like, inside, I'm not going to say this to someone's face, but it's like that's the least of your concerns is overtraining. Like you've been you don't overtrain and then get 60 pounds overweight. That's not what happened. Like let's get to a point where you're extremely fit, and then we can even think about the concept of overtraining. But no one is getting there. And I think that you're completely correct that it is a myth. I don't know a single person, and I know some people have played in the program and stuff as well. I don't know a single person who has legitimately overtrained.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, again, I know you were a soccer player before, so like in our sport, it's kind of rare. Now, there is a challenge in professional soccer, not in Canada, but in some other countries where the leagues and the different international competitions run almost the whole year. They're playing lots of games. Some of them, it depends on the league, but some of the top players, 70 games, 80 games a year, and exhibitions and all that. Like they can get to that point maybe. Overtraining in athletes typically happens more in the individual sports where the requirement in order to make improvements it's just so demanding. Swimming, track and field, these, where they're training 4 or 5, maybe even 6 hours a day, multiple workouts a day. That's when overtraining happens. And basically, again, the idea behind, of course, if people are undertrained or unfit or unprepared, and then they immediately, do a workout or a series of exercises that they're literally not prepared for, they're going to get hurt. But they did not get hurt because they overtrained. They got hurt or not because they did too much. They got hurt because they did too much too soon. Yeah. And that's, I think a good message for any, fitness coach.
Yeah. Again, of course, overtraining does exist, but like you said, these are people playing individual sports at the highest level, Olympic and world-class athletes who are training multiple hours a day, not doing 3 group class workouts a week. Like that's not, that's not it, and nothing against the, the group classes on that. But it's like, it's a good time of year, I think, for this message to get out there, because September is a big fitness month. Some people don't realize it, but like January is the big, like, I'm going to get back into shape, but then September is the second version of that, because after the summer of doing everything and vacation and partying, September, get back into school, get back into routine, like, I'm going to get back into it, and you see the gyms get busy again, and then it's like, all right, I'm just going back into it, right back what I was doing in March, and it's like, well, okay, but you haven't worked out in 3 months, or you've been working out very, very little, so what makes you think you could do the same thing? And that's again where injury happens, and then it feeds into this, oh, well, I did too much. And no, you were just out of shape, and you've got to temper your expectations correctly, because that's the only thing that gets you injured. It's the tissues not being able to handle the load that you're demanding of them, and not because you overloaded them.
It's another violation of the acute chronic workload ratio.
Exactly. Now, something that happened very recently, and this is a little bit of a side topic here, but I wanted to get your thoughts on it if you have any more insight on this. In the NFL, the season just started, right? Yeah. So athletes, and again, all professional athletes are not like super dialed in, the best. They may have access to all the resources, but that doesn't mean they always have the best training. Right. Now, they also don't always have the best technology and stuff, even though they should. Yeah. Aaron Rodgers, very prolific quarterback. He tore his Achilles in the first game of the season, very, very early in the game. Now, a lot of the criticism from this is the turf field versus a regular grass field. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Because before, I know I can see your brain ticking there, but there's been a lot of criticism from some strength coaches who I follow online, like, oh, that this is completely avoidable. There's no way you should be tearing your Achilles first game of the season. You should be training and be able to handle this. And then a lot of people are like, well, you can handle as much as you can handle, and there's some element of chance, and like being on a turf field doesn't help that in any way? So what are your thoughts on the turf versus grass? I know this is not applicable to like, Gen Pop people, but
sure.
what's your thoughts on it?
I'll tell you, I probably have a lot of thoughts on that. So the first thing I would say is, and I saw, and I didn't watch the game, but I saw, the footage of the tackle and the injury and all that. And, the way I saw it, there's a big, linebacker or whoever it is, right? This guy probably weighs a good 250 pounds and he's running fast. So, I wonder if we had a load cell or something on that Achilles tendon. Basically, he's being pulled backwards and down right at the point where his foot is contacting the ground. And this is, we would call that plantar flexion, and it's part of, the extension of the hip, knee, and ankle. He's trying to run forward. So and by the way, a lot of that load is going straight into that tendon. Okay. So he's basically trying to propel himself forward on one leg, and he's not as big as this big weight behind him. Would I call that unavoidable or would I call that preventable? Honestly, no. I think, football is a contact sport, and unfortunately, these things can happen, and it's just the nature of the game when big, heavy people are tackling you and all that. Usually the injuries that are considered preventable in football, soccer, whatever, and, then we'll get into the discussion of turf, but usually the injuries that are considered preventable, or at least where we should be able to, through proper training, mitigate and minimize the risk, are the injuries that are non-contact. So player runs and sprints and then decelerates, and kind of that last step before they plant and turn, that landing from a jump, these kind of movements where there's no external load other than whatever the athlete has with their own body weight and, inertia and all that. So the non-contact injuries are the ones that are more preventable. This was not a non-contact injury. So keep that in mind. And then we have to talk about, the turf itself. So the newer generations of field turf, I don't know the facility where, Aaron Rodgers was playing, but, it's the NFL. I would guess that maybe they've invested in the best possible quality of turf. The differences in, let's say, the friction that is experienced when athletes are running and slowing down and all that, and the kind of the consistency and all of that between those newer generation turf and grass, they aren't that different. So there probably is a smaller risk, and you have to forgive me because I'm not up to date on all the literature on it, but I remember, so there were initial types of artificial turf way back, like in the 80s and 90s, and sometimes this was called AstroTurf, or it was almost like a carpet. The friction, it was really, really high. Lots of players got hurt on those, football, soccer, all of it, right? And eventually, field turf started to become created with infill, with, rubber or other materials that started to make the ground reaction forces and the shock absorption, and again, the friction, experience, like all of these things started to become more consistent with grass. And, so I don't know for sure. There may be a slightly higher risk from it, but again, I go back to, he didn't get hurt because of the turf. He got hurt because he was on one leg, plantar flexing and propelling himself forward against a huge resistance pulling him backward. And
he got hurt because he was playing football.
Yes, that's what I would say. So yeah.
No, fair enough. I think to bring this back to being more relevant to people, that was just curious off my head. But I kind of agree with you. It's like maybe, but the overwhelming biggest factor was like it was a football play, and that happens in football. It just it seems it's incredibly unfortunate that it's like first game with a new team, fourth play of the game. Like you couldn't write it any worse. But it is what it is.
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, just one thing about that though that what we don't know. And this is where some of the, technology can be really helpful, is what was the accumulation of load and fatigue on the Achilles tendon before?
Right.
And I'm working, actually my PhD, supervisor, who's like a biomechanist at the University of Guelph, he's done a ton of work using ultrasound imaging, essentially to measure sort of the elasticity and the, kind of the pliability of tendons and ligaments as a predictor of injury. And he's not worked with football, but he has worked with even some other like varsity athletes at the school, and also general population, older people, etc. And so these are the kind of, technological tools that could really be useful because, who knows, perhaps that leg was a little weaker, maybe there were some tackles in training or some other things, maybe he's older, he's got wear and tear, and, it was a little, the accumulation of load and fatigue weakened the tendon a bit more. So
right.
Anyway.
Yeah, no. I mean, if that technology comes to becomes more available and more and efficiently accurate and whatnot, it seems like it would be a great thing to be utilized in the NFL. And you might not, you might still put the guy in the game because like he's got to play. It's professional sports. It's not a little kid playing. Yeah. But you maybe do some more work. Maybe there's a tape job that you can do to help prevent it or something like that. And you do some more prep in camp or just some more attention to it before, because a lot of times with these injuries, like, they don't feel anything until it snaps. Right. But if you had a way of detecting that there's a weakness in the tissue, you could start to give some attention to it before there's an actual tangible feeling of something going wrong. Right. And I think, again, to bring this back to sort of regular people, is that you mentioned that most of these injuries that are preventable are the non-contact injuries, which are a lot of what regular people experience, right? I was just, picking up the grocery bag. I was just going down the stairs. I was just, quote
getting
unquote,
out of the shower.
Doing a regular life activity. Like most people are not getting tackled by 300-pound linebackers. Like this is not happening in your life. So all your injuries are non-contact injuries, and they're mostly preventable through training. Just through being physically fit. Your training doesn't have to be like the most intelligent, super good training. Of course, you want to optimize, like you mentioned, but it doesn't have to be like some crazy professional athlete like training. You just have to be training, because if you're not preparing your body for the stuff that happens, that's when things go wrong. And I think that it should be the take home message for most people from this conversation. Is like, if you're not prepared, then when the demands exceed the capabilities, injury occurs.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems so simple to say, but it's obviously very difficult. And again, with sports, heading into the off season ish of soccer here in Ontario, the end of the season and stuff in Canada, US, there's going to be a lot of players who are transitioning into off season training programs and getting prepped for next season. And it's like, well, you don't need to train your hardest right now. You got to taper up and get yourself prepped for next season, because the training during the season is the time to maintain what you've got and stay healthy. You shouldn't be the time where you're improving, versus regular people where you don't have a season, you don't have games or tournaments or whatever. It's just you're kind of always in this steady improvement. So your periodization is a little bit less important because it's less specific. And you're not a pro athlete, but still you should be considering, like, how much have you been doing, and is what you are going to try and do a little bit more than that, but not too much more than that.
Yep. 5 to 20%, let's say.
Yeah. No, it's a good way to think about it in that percentage way, because I think people just go way too get ahead of themselves. And probably more true in men, especially in the context of weightlifting, where it's like, hey, I used to do this back in the day. It's like, okay, but back in the day was 25 years ago. Like, let's be real about what's going on here. Like, let's chill for a second. So yeah, it's super important, I think, to kind of just nail that down for a lot of people here.
For sure. Yeah.
Now, one thing that you wanted to talk about before, is there anything else you wanted to say just on the kind of periodization stuff? I mean, you can talk for forever on it, but is there anything else that you kind of wanted to get into on periodization or just like load management, stuff like that?
I think we've given it enough time. Yeah, we're good. Yeah.
Switching gears then on this, and as we start to come to a close, one thing we want to talk about was just a little bit more of the kind of the business side, or the professional side of training, where a lot of people, and myself included, and probably yourself, we come from a background of playing sports at a moderate to high-ish level, or whatever level it was, and you think that, I want to train athletes, I want to train the pros, I want to train LeBron James, I want to work for the Toronto Maple Leafs, I want to do the thing. What's been your experience from a professional and business standpoint of like working with actual athletes versus working with general population, and seeing younger people come through the system through school and stuff like that?
Right. Yeah. So my own story probably is pretty common in the sense that I chose to study kinesiology because I was an athlete, and I played at the university level and a little bit in a semi-pro league here in Canada, but I was a decent athlete. But whatever, like a lot of I think athletes, when they're in high school or whatever, maybe they decide to get into, kinesiology or one of the fitness and health promotion, programs, or even, to work as a fitness coach outside of, let's say post-secondary education or whatever, but they get into it often because it's sort of it's almost a natural progression from being an athlete to learning about the body and sports and all that. And I think it's also probably very common. And I say this not just because of my own experience, or not my own as a student and a student athlete and all that, but in my business, we've had literally hundreds of internship students. We have lots of, employees that are either current or former university or college students. And then all the students that I've been teaching. It's been 7 years now that I've been a, part-time and eventually almost a full-time professor. So there's just lots of young kinesiology and fitness and health promotion students that I interact with and have interacted with. So it's a common theme. You get into studying it, you get into it because you're an athlete, and probably a lot of them are also thinking about, wow, I'd like to train athletes. I'd like to be a strength and conditioning coach for the Toronto Raptors or, TFC or whatever. And, obviously for me, because my sport was soccer, I worked very hard and connected myself at some of those higher levels. And I was fortunate to get some opportunities to work with national teams and professional and then even, through my business with hundreds of professional athletes, initially soccer and eventually even lots of other sports as well. And the truth is that, again, it makes sense for people to want to do that. And I don't want to come off as a hypocrite again. I probably contradicted myself a few times between actions and words, but, hope this isn't another time that I do that. But, sometimes, let's say from the standpoint or the perspective of just the economical perspective or the economics of the fitness industry, it's important for people who want to do that kind of work to think about it from a numbers perspective, right? So first of all, what percentage of the total population in Canada, Ontario, Toronto, wherever are athletes? And I don't know. I mean, I don't know that, but if I had to guess, I would say, I don't know, maybe 10%, maybe 5%, something like that. It's a small number. And then from there, okay, well, what percentage are competitive athletes? And it's probably, again, at least cut that in half, if even less, right? And then from there, you have to say, well, okay, you want to provide services to these, 5% of 5%, and how many can afford it? If you want to, do, training programs and, whatever it is, and how many live close to you? Because I said Ontario and, or Toronto, and Toronto's a huge city. And anyway, so essentially the point that I'm making, I don't know the specifics, but I know that it's a tiny fraction of the total potential audience that might benefit from fitness training or whatever, right? So it's a niche. And then from there, again, I mean, I even made an even smaller niche for myself because for 10 years, my company was soccer fitness, which means we just trained soccer players. And anyway, I had connections and I had lots of, between my playing days and coaching and all that. And I had kind of enough of a clientele to do it. But it's when you get into those niche type businesses, okay, well, it's inherently much more competitive. And then I can speak about eventually in my career when I started to get to the higher levels. I always had my business, but I worked with the women's national teams for a long time, men's national team a little bit, several different professional clubs, university teams, and still am. And, so, in those environments, and it's not just in soccer, this is very true in anything from basketball to baseball, hockey, whatever. Okay. The supply of young and smart and competent and willing strength and conditioning coaches is way greater than the demand. Okay, what do we have? 4 or 5, kind of top level professional clubs in Toronto. Now, okay, there's the CPL in soccer and there's the OHL in hockey and there's whatever, the NBA D League or, like kind of these. So, but again, those are small, and so
but also the drop off in money from the big club to the second team is significant, right? Yeah. So and I've experienced both, right? So again, the supply way over exceeds the demand. Yeah. And what does that mean? Well, that means that the clubs that are hiring, they know that, and they don't pay very much. I mean, even the top clubs, and I don't want to get into the specifics and former employers and all that, but it's the way it is. Okay. So if you want to get into that environment, or that type of work running a business, great.
but understand that it's a niche and you're going to have to work really, really, really hard to, to make a living and all that. If you want to get into it in the, college, semi-pro, pro level, great. Like, don't get discouraged, but go with your eyes open and, understand that, honestly, you might get offered a $30,000 contract. You might get, who knows, right? Again, I don't want to get into all the specifics, but it's, and on top of, the supply exceeding the demand, there's also, what can I say? There's no stability at all. Right. Okay. So, in the blink of an eye, team doesn't do well, coach gets fired, and this is the coach that brought you in, and, or even just other changes can happen. I mean,
of course,
basically, as far as I can tell, I stopped working with the women's national program simply because they moved their operation out to BC and just figured that, they couldn't bring me out there because I was in Ontario. So anyway,
sure, but it's also like a logistical thing that matters. Like if they had offered you, you still might have said no because you have a family, and so do you want to move your family to BC for a job that you also might get fired in 2 months from because the wind changes direction that day? Who knows, right? Yeah. So it's a realistic thing, and thinking about travel and where you live and your family life, and so it's a thing that has to be considered.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that because I took so many of these different jobs and when I was single and didn't have kids, and then I lived in other countries. I lived in South America. I lived in other cities, Ottawa, and traveled. I mean, a couple of years with the national team where I was away from home, almost 150 days out of the year, and so I've lived that life, and the truth is that there's almost a trade-off between all the excitement and just the amazing experiences of being at a youth World Cup or, in a big stadium, professional games and that atmosphere and, those moments and those memories that just live with me forever. Okay. But what do you do? Well, you sacrifice other things for that. So you sacrifice free time, and again, the pay isn't great and the stability and all that. And so if you want to experience those things, great. But, understand that there are going to be those sacrifices involved. And as you mentioned, as I got older, when I had when I got married and started my family, well, then some of those things that were offered to me, and which I remember one in particular, I won't name it, but it was even 4 or 5 years ago, I would have in a heartbeat would have moved and done this, and I had to say no. So that happens. And so one of the courses that I used to teach at the college level, I really loved it. It's an interesting course, and maybe it'll come back at some point, or I'll get another opportunity to do something similar, but it was called Career Launch. It was in the fitness and health promotion program. It was the last year and the last semester for students right before they graduate. So it's a course literally trying to help them launch their career and give them ideas about how to make a resume and, job interviews and all that kind of stuff. And I came up with this little, 4x4, axis. Maybe other people have come up with something similar, but anyway, this was my idea, where essentially you had these 4 variables and you ranked the importance of each of those 4 out of 10. But, we imposed limitations, that you could only have initially only a maximum of 25, points available to you, and eventually only 20. And those 4 variables on that axis were money, stability, work-life balance or family life, and passion. And, from my own example, well, passion to me was a 15 or, it was almost a 25, and everything else kind of, got sacrificed. And,
right.
That's an extreme example, but, just to tell them that, at some point when you're choosing a career in the fitness industry, it's very likely that you're going to have, those choices, and you're going to have to sacrifice something.
Yeah.
So, and I know that even the fitness professionals that don't go and do what I did and focus on athletes, even the ones that want to do whatever it is, personal training, group training, exercise classes, consulting, testing, often they're still prioritizing passion over some of the other
of course,
variables. And,
a story that I have on that one is when I was working downtown, and I was super busy in person only, as many sessions as possible. Mm-hmm. There was a condo right beside the gym.
Right. Yeah.
And so a new client came in, and we started training together and trying to figure out her schedule, what time of day, or how many times a week she's going to come or whatever it was. And she goes, "Oh, well, what time are you open from?" And I said, oh, the gym's open from 6 a.m. till about 9 p.m. At night and Saturdays and whatever. And she goes, okay, they're like, that's fine. Well, what time are you here? Like, what are your hours? I want to train with you only. What time are your hours? And I was like, well, 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. and all day Saturday and whatever. And she's like, she kind of paused and she looked at me and she goes, you definitely don't have a girlfriend, do you?
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, yeah, I just started laughing. I'm like, yeah, well, when you work all of the available hours, like, yeah, I go home and rush myself to sleep, and then Saturdays I'm just gassed. And so, like, she was right, but just to say, like, there's work-life balance, but sometimes it has to be unbalanced in a certain direction to get where you want to go. And so it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And I don't regret what I did. I would do it again for sure. The same way that I did, and same as you, right? You wouldn't pass up all those years of traveling and working with the people that you got to work with and making the connections that you got to make, because it all got you here. But you got to do it. I think that the message here is you got to do it with your eyes open and know what you're getting into, right? Because you can be chasing something that you really don't want, and you may end up chasing it for far too long and not really getting ahead, right?
Yeah, right. And it's funny that sometimes you mentioned girlfriend, and I mean my girlfriend who became my wife, when we met and she kind of saw how my life was going and all that, she was a good stabilizing force, let's say, right. And helping me to be a bit more pragmatic in the decisions of what work I decided to take on and what I didn't. Because the truth is, and this is like, again, what I'm doing with again, running the business and trying to work at higher levels in the sport and all that, like, you could really, really quickly overextend yourself. There's so many things that come up that are exciting and interesting and you want to do, and you just can't say yes to everything, and there's just no way to do it. But anyway.
Yeah. The thing that I think, to take away for people who are maybe in the fitness industry, and even just to tie this into kind of like general population fitness, is to keep the goal, and the goal is to help people or to train athletes. And if you're taking on 17 different jobs, or if you're trying to do so many training sessions in a week, or you're trying to do so many things, you're not doing your goal of, in a business context of helping people, because you're not effectively helping people. Or two, in your fitness context, if you're trying to do too many different things that are not actually achieving the goal of improving your fitness, well, then you're just doing stuff and not getting any better. So right. That's not really helping. Just to kind of make this conversation full circle, like, training a lot is great, but your training has to be effective and an appropriate intensity and an appropriate load and all that stuff. So keep the goal and chase that, and then fill in the gaps where you can.
Right. Yeah. Good advice.
Awesome, Richard. Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of let the people know about before we close off here?
Well, I guess I don't know if anybody would be interested in the work that I'm doing. I can direct. We've got a simple website, speedtraining.ca, and we're on Instagram under the same handle, and Twitter as well, actually under the same handle. And where our facility, for your listeners who are in Toronto and in the particular part of the city, we're in Vaughan, we're in Woodbridge. And so the main intersection is Weston Road and Langstaff, and it's a beautiful new facility. We've got an open house planned. I'm not sure when this will come out, this episode, but our open house is going to be on Saturday, October 28th.
It'll be before.
I'm sure you and I will connect with, maybe we'll promote it, and be great. Even if you're around, come out and have a look.
Absolutely.
And yeah. So it's an exciting time, and hope to see some people there.
Yeah, of course. No, Speed Training. I'll put your contact info, all of Richard's contact info in the show notes here. And again, for anyone who's in the Toronto GTA, Vaughan area, Weston and Langstaff, which is a pretty easy to get to area, even if you're not from Woodbridge specifically, based on the highways and the roads and stuff like that. So a great location. And again, I'm just super happy for you that you've been able to make this next step in your career and keep pushing the athletics forward and helping people to train better, because it all trickles down from there, right? I think an obvious example in sport, and I'll stop rambling in a second, is like a lot of advancements in automobiles happen in Formula One, which is like the pinnacle of automobile anything. And then we get ABS brakes in our your minivan, like, right. Like that, right. That's how it happens, right? There
you go. Mm-hmm.
And so it's like we get these crazy advancements in the highest level of sport, where minute differences do make a difference, and then that trickles down to regular people and regular life. And so we need people people like you pushing the research forward and continuing to experiment and try new things and do what works and show why it works, so that the rest of us can benefit and apply to quote unquote regular life.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's great analogy. Actually, I'll have to remember that one. Yeah. All right.
Good one. All right, Richard, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Speed Training, Richard Bucciarelli. I'll put all the links in the show notes, but Speed Training everywhere. That's that. Give me a follow as well on Instagram at Daniel Yoris. Like, share, subscribe to the episode. All that good stuff really helps spread the good message, spread the message of training and health and longevity as well. Then see you next time.